everyone. Welcome back to the CH Wine Tasting Room. You had some questions, we've got some answers. It's me, Chris Lafleur, your super sommelier, here with the wonderful Wanda Mann. Wanda, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm very good. Are you ready to answer some questions today?
Always. Bring me your
Beautiful.
questions.
The only problem is our glasses are currently empty, so this has got to be resolved.
Yes.
I'll tell you what I got.
Yes, we'd love to know.
This is Lot 921. It is a white wine blend from the North Coast, and it's a bit of a, I don't want to say it's like a Frankenstein, but it's kind of a Frankenstein. Okay. It's a lot of pieces that you don't normally see together, but sometimes they can surprise you. It is Chardonnay, bit of Viognier, bit of Sauvignon Blanc, and some Pinot Grigio. So lots of stuff that don't usually end up on the same label, but together they form something very interesting and incredibly lifted on the nose.
Lovely. Well, I went for the Lot 860, which is the 2020 Malbec from Lodi. I love Malbec. I've been to Mendoza, and that's kind of the cradle for Malbec. But Malbec is such an interesting grape. I think it's in that category of people know it by name, but they don't really know it. Mm-hmm. It started in France. It really found a home in Argentina and Mendoza, and now we see it in Lodi. So I'm curious to see this different expression of a grape that I know pretty well.
Well, cheers to exploring.
Cheers. Pinot Noir, finicky little persnickety diva. Well, it's a fragile grape. It's thin-skinned. It likes cool climate. It likes very particular conditions. So they call it the Heartbreak grape because so many winemakers approach it with such enthusiasm and passion, knowing what can be achieved. But it takes very little for it to go wrong, right?
Some of the best wines I've ever had in the world have been Pinot Noirs. But there's also some of the most disappointing wines I've ever had in the world have also been Pinot Noir.
Yes. So very fragile. Any other wine nicknames that you know?
Oh, geez. I'm pretty sure that people refer to Cabernet Sauvignon as the king of grapes. And I mean, just given how popular it is based on its presence in Napa Valley, how you have Cabernet Sauvignon everywhere in the world, like Australia, even in Canada, in France, of course, and in South Africa, it's kind of hard to say that it's not, in the royalty at least.
That is true. I think it's a very... That's the beauty of Cabernet. It's everywhere, but it expresses itself differently, right? There's some core characteristics, but again, I think winemakers embrace it because they can put their unique stamp on it and get that sense of place, depending on where it's being produced.
Another one that I think it's a kind of a funny name is our ABC Chardonnay. Anything but Chardonnay. Which is that, for a long time, there was this trend of like putting a lot of oak on Chardonnay, sometimes making it a very overwrought bomb of a wine, when it can actually be very elegant and refined. And now we're starting to see that there's much more to Chardonnay than how much time it spends in a barrel. So anyone who's in the anything but Chardonnay camp, it's time to revisit it.
Yeah, I've heard people reclaiming that ABC and changing it to always bring Chardonnay.
Ooh.
So there is a movement.
Don't mind if I do.
Yes, absolutely.
So the question is, what is the purpose of the different kinds of wine bottles? I presume the different shapes that we see. Wanda, what do you think about these particular ones? They're obviously quite different. What stands out here?
Well, look, here you have a clear bottle, right? So not only is the shape more curvaceous, but this is a younger wine, it's a white wine, this is a more playful wine, maybe not intended for long aging, so you don't maybe mind some light getting into the bottle there.
And also, given it's such a lovely wine, why not have a closer look at the color?
Yep.
Another thing that I see here is that given the difference in shapes too, we have some names associated with them. This is normally a Burgundy style bottle, and this is a Bordeaux style. And then you also have the really thin, skinny, tall ones, which are Alsatian, if you will.
Exactly.
And now, what purpose do each of them serve? My understanding is that the shapes are primarily there to help them stack more easily. Like these ones, when you lay them down, they actually interlink together when they're facing each other. And these ones are great for stacking up on top of each other because they don't move. So a lot of it, I think, is storage related. Do you have any other insight?
No, I agree. I think a lot of it is a very efficient vessel, right? Like you said, for stacking purposes, it's easy to grab.
Yes. I think some people will say that like there's difference in aging or certain wines have to go in certain bottle types, but that's not really true anymore. Like Nebbiolo is a great example. You can find them both in Burgundy bottles and in Bordeaux's, and I don't know if they denote a particular style or not because I've had them from all over.
It's true. I think there's a lot of mixing and matching, and often with some winemakers, it's purely an aesthetic choice. What shape do they like?
Addressing another rumor, there's a suggestion that these bottles are here and shaped like this because Bordeaux and wines that are counted in the Bordeaux varieties tend to throw a lot of sediment as they age over time. So having a neck like this can actually catch some of the sediment as you're pouring it.
Interesting.
Now, in my experience as a sommelier, when I'm decanting, I'm as careful with these as I am with these, and I still find I get some sediment in here if I'm not being completely careful from these kind of bottles. But it's an interesting idea.
It is. I think it just goes to show like every detail from not just from the vineyard, but in what contains the wine is important, right?
Exactly.
It impacts the drinking experience.
And your technique. So hire me as your sommelier, and I'll try and keep the sediment out. I promise.
Exactly. How much time do we have? Honestly, I believe it's both. Clearly, there's science involved. We're talking about fermentation. So there is science. And I'm not a science geek, so I'm not going to get all of that. But clearly, we know there are chemical processes that happen, all kinds of things we have to worry about to make sure that the wine comes out balanced and safe for us to consume. I think the artistry comes in. I see the grapes, what the vineyard produces, as the palette that the winemaker is able to create with. And this is an expression of their place and of their vision. So I do believe there is an artistic component, because if Chris and I were winemakers, you could give both of us the same, grapes from the same vineyard and say, create something, and it would be completely different. So I think that's where the artistry comes in. What do you think?
I completely agree. There's definitely a huge portion of the wine that is artistry, and like the choice of the winemaker, what do they want to show you? And if that's not artistic, then I don't know what is. For me, I really love the science side, the nerdy side.
So we balance each other out.
There we go. I love that there are things about wine that are objective. Because I find sometimes when you get very odd tasting notes like, oh, freshly opened tennis balls. I'm looking at you guys, Master Soms. I'm like, I don't know if that helps me so much. But when I know that there's pyrazines in a wine, giving it green pepper aromas, when I know that there's rotundones giving black pepper, that helps me a lot zero in on what we're looking for and where it could be from and what do I want to know about this in the winemaking process.
No, that's a really good point. I was never a great science student in school, but the amount of science that I've learned through my studies of wine about pyrazines and malolactic fermentation, all these terms that you learn as you're growing and you're tasting. So you're right, the science provides that objectivity, that foundation to better understand the artistry.
So it sounds like we've hit it. It is a thorough combination of art and science, and both sides are very pleasurable to explore.
Yes, so true.
So is there a seasonality component to when you drink what wine at what time? I think yes and no, because always personal preference does trump what the rules are. Like if you like a wine that's really heavy and driven and full of structure, and it's the summertime and you want to drink it on a 40°C day. By the way, I am Canadian, so I apologize. Celsius, it's another way of measuring temperature. I mean, if you can totally do that. I don't know that I would, and I also don't know that I'd build a program around it, but it's an option for you. I think for seasonality for me, I do like to have lighter reds in the summer and colder whites in the summer because they're just more pleasant. And then I've also had like great Cabernet Sauvignons in the wintertime when it gets really warm, you want higher alcohol, and some whites from the Northern Rhone, which are affectionately referred to as winter whites.
Yep.
Because they have a little bit more texture, they're a little bit more deep, and so there's more to pull out of them. Something you would sit by a fire and sip. What about yourself?
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of it has to do with the weight and texture and the body of the wine. Just in the same way, for those of us who live in places where the seasons change, when spring and summer come, we generally crave lighter, fresher food. So it makes sense that our wine choices would mirror that. But I think also, for example, in Florida, Miami, I hear they drink a lot of big red wines, maybe because they're in air conditioning a lot when they go out to eat. So, there's really no hard and fast rules. Rosé, there's this idea that it's only for spring and summer. Some are fresh and fruity, but you have rosés that can age, some that see a little bit of oak that have more body. So it really depends on that particular wine and, of course, what you like.
Oh, yeah. I love also calling it rosé de garde, like the rosé you can hold on to. Some rosé is pretty serious, and you might want to have it, in the depth of winter.
So true.
Ooh.
Well, I assume you want to keep your friend. I would say you could replace them with a friend who already likes wine, but...
Simplest way. Lots of people out there looking for connections.
So if that's not an option, so the clues that they give me as a beer drinker, they like things that are cool, refreshing, crisp. So start them off with the nice, interesting white wine, something very similar to what Chris is drinking. I think this white wine blend. So I think that's a great introduction. It's not over the top. It's pleasant. It has some fruitiness. It's refreshing. So I think it has some of those characteristics that a beer drinker would like. Then they can work their way up because there are many different styles of beer. Are they an IPA drinker? Are they a Pilsner? Are they a stout? So what do you think?
I think that's the right direction completely. I also say, hey, if they like beer that's got a little fizz to it, why not start with some wine with a little fizz and get them some champagne?
Exactly.
It's pretty hard to not like champagne, even though I know it happens in rare occasions. Another thing that I like, whenever I'm dealing with a table that's not adventurous about wine, but wants to try something new, I ask them, what do they like to drink when they're at home? Do you like coffee? Great, because I have a wine that has lots of tannin, so it'll be a little bit bitter just like that. Do you like orange juice? Wonderful. I have some white wine that has some good acidity to it, and it's going to show you a little bit of mandarin orange on the palate. So there's always something that can match there. It's trying to find the way in.
Exactly. Good question. I like that.
Really good call. And don't give up on your friend just yet.
Yes, I was just joking.
Ooh, great question. I love that one. So why do we emphasize the varietal in the New World or in North America versus the region back in the Old World? So there's a simple answer to this, and it's that the Old World has just been making wine for a lot longer than we have in North America. And the concept of terroir is more ingrained in the Old World, so there's the idea that it's the sense of place that gives a wine its identity, not just the grape that's in it. So it's not enough to say that something is Pinot Noir from Bourgogne. It's this village of Bourgogne, and it's this vineyard in Bourgogne. When monks were planting the region, all it took was one of them in the 1300s asking the question, why do the grapes on this side of the road grow better than the ones on this side? And it became clear how important site-specific wines were. And then in the New World, we've kind of done something the opposite. Instead of having to adapt to the region that we're in, we can pick which region we want to be in. And then it becomes more important about, well, what is this grape like? Also, when you're dealing with old world wines, and I'm sure you can confirm this, generally the history of those regions that they struggle to ripen sometimes. And when you come over to the New World, we can pick sites that ripen every time. So we don't have that push and pull of, oh, this is what the region gave us. It's more of, this is what grape turned out of this place.
No, I think that's a perfect explanation. And also just because they have the longer history as well, more experience in time drinking wine. So I think if we look here in the US, if we just said, here, I'm going to pour you a glass of Napa, that would have been very confusing to people. So I think starting with what this is was really important to expanding the North American knowledge of what wine is. So.
Yeah, and I think it'll grow. I think it's possible that there's a day coming where someone says, oh, it's Napa, got to be Cabernet Sauvignon, I'll have it. Even though I think that would be a little bit unfortunate because there's really great stuff like Merlot out here too. Like, don't hate on Merlot. Forget about Sideways.
Yes, absolutely. Well, there are two answers to that. If you feel like drinking it now, drink it now, right? Because I think there is a tendency, sometimes we hold on to something for a special occasion that may or may not come. But definitely, if there is a wine that you've had before, and it's a special wine, it has the capacity for aging, you might want to lay it down for a bit just to see that evolution. But I think that really is a personal choice. This is something that often happens in my own household. Because I write about wine, I often have to taste wines now to write about them now. My partner is a somm. He likes to wait a bit often when he can. So this is a bit of a tug of war that we have. But more often than not, we're fortunate that we can have several bottles and put one aside. But I'm a big believer in, try it now, see where it is, and then say, you know what, if you can get a second bottle, I'm gonna put that one aside.
Part of the videos that we do here, we always think about like, where does this fit in your cellar so that you know, is this a wine to lie down or not? Because if you don't have a lot of experience tasting, or maybe you don't understand how to look for the potential in the wine, then that's something that we can provide for you. We can give you some context about what are the structural elements in a wine that once you learn to pick them out, you'll know that whether or not this is gonna change and become more interesting over time.
Yeah, I think that context is important because, we are here to help and to taste and kind of give you an outline and a blueprint. And that's why we often encourage, if you can, to buy more than one bottle. So you can try one now and say, okay, I do like it now, or you know what, I am going to wait with the others because, Chris and Wanda said, let's try it a little later. So I think it's an important part of this process. Just giving the wine time to evolve. Like I said, you may like it more, you may like it less, but it is part of the journey in tasting wine.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Like ultimately it comes down to personal taste, but for me, when I've had enough wine and recognize like, okay, this has got a lot of tannin, or this has got a lot of acidity, then I can recognize there are hallmarks here that say this is gonna age really well and change over the course of time that I let it lie down. And for me, I always like, well, not always, I usually enjoy the change that comes. And so I look for that. I look for wines that can change, and I want to watch how they do.
And also I think there's often an emotional component to wine. So depending on where you got that bottle, who you're going to share it with, what the occasion is, waiting sometimes maybe scientifically might be the right call, but in that emotional moment, connecting with the wine, now might be the time.
Oh yeah. So. I've got a 5-year anniversary coming up with my wife, and there's a bottle that's sitting in my fridge that I know has 10 more years on it, but I think it's time to pop that cork.
Yep, exactly.
Oh boy. Why do wine prices vary so much? Wanda, what do you think about
He said
that
it's
one?
for you, Chris.
That's true. I think to vex me, to cause me distemper and sadness. But I mean, there's lots of reasons. Depending on what market you're in, just the import tax or the difficulty of transportation can change how much a bottle is going to cost. Like if it's got to come from very far away, that might be more expensive here than over there. And on the other side of that, if it's a wine that's maybe found through the secondary market and not through direct to consumer or not from the winery, then it might be one that's really sought after, and that can drive the price up too, especially if it's at auction. There's lots of reasons that wine prices can change. Wanda, what do you think?
Yeah, I think we often forget, we see the finished product, but we don't think about what it takes to get here. So the land, who's taking care of those vineyards, right? The labor, what happens in the cellar, the equipment, the bottling, the marketing, the shipping. So there's a lot in addition to the taxes, the fees, and all of those things. So making wine is not an inexpensive endeavor. So I think, it's the business side of it that we often forget about. But and especially if we're talking about certain, if you're talking about Burgundy, if you're talking about Napa, the land prices here are quite expensive.
Oh, yeah.
So that's just the reality of it.
And in Napa, you can see the borders of Napa, and it's not that far away from Sonoma, but there's still a significant difference between a bottle that says Sonoma Cabernet Sauvignon and Napa Cabernet Sauvignon. Sometimes that's because there's a difference in the ground. Sometimes it's just the name. And you have to be a conscious consumer of what you're buying, and that's also why we're here to help. We're going to try and point you at the value propositions. Well, Wanda, we've come to the end of our questions for this round. Thank you so much for your questions. There's nothing that we like better than answering the things that you need to know about wine, because that is what our job is, 100%. So with that, I'm going to go finish this one.
And I'm going to finish this one, and maybe we'll share two.
Oh yeah, okay. We'll swap a little bit. And we will see you at the next glass.
Cheers.
Cheers.